Greetings, my lovely Lovecraftians and my darlings of the deep. Today, I'll be reading Ashes by C M Eddy Jr. with H P Lovecraft. This is a collaboration story, much like our modern day VTuber collabs. I can't wait to see how they complement and constrict each other throughout their writing. Let us begin. Hello, Bruce. Haven't seen you in a dog's age. Come on in. I threw open the door, and he followed into the room. His gaunt, ungainly figure sprawled awkwardly into the chair I indicated, and he twirled his hat between his nervous fingers. His deepest eyes wore a worried, hunted look, and he glanced furtively around the room as if searching for something hidden, which might unexpectedly pounce upon him. His face was haggard and colorless. The corners of his mouth twitched spasmodically. What's the matter, old man? You look as if you've seen a ghost. Brace up. I crossed to the buffet and poured a small glass of wine from the decanter. Drink this. He downed it with a hasty gulp and took to toying with his hat again. Thanks, Prig. I don't feel quite like myself tonight. You don't look it either. What's wrong? Malcolm Bruce shifted uneasily in his chair. I eyed him in silence for a moment, wondering what could possibly affect the man so strongly. I knew Bruce was a man of steady nerve and iron will. To find him so visibly upset was, in itself, unusual. I passed cigars and he selected one automatically. It was not until the second cigar had been lighted that Bruce broke the silence. His nervousness was apparently gone. Once more, he was the dominant, self-reliant figure I knew of old. Well, Greg, he began. I've just been through the most devilish, gruesome experience that ever befell a man. And I don't know whether I dare tell it or not, for fear you'll think I've gone crazy. And I wouldn't blame you if you did. But it's true, every word of it. He paused dramatically and blew a few rings of smoke in the air. I smiled. Many a weird tale I had listened to over the self-same table. There must have been some kink in my personality that inspired confidence. For I had been told stories that some men would have given years of their life to have heard, and yet, despite my love of the bizarre and the dangerous, and my longing to explore the far reaches of little-known lands, I'd been doomed to a life of prismatic, flat, uneventful business. Do you happen to have heard of Professor Van Allister? Asked Bruce. You don't mean Arthur Van Allister, the same. Then you know him? I should say so. Known him for years. Ever since he resigned as the professor of chemistry at the college so he could have more time for his experiments. Why, I even helped him choose the plans for the soundproof laboratory of his on the top floor of his home. Then he got so busy with the confounded experiments he couldn't find time to be chummy. You may recall, Craig, that when we were in college together, I used to dabble quite a bit in chemistry. I nodded and Bruce continued. About 4 months ago, I found myself out of a job. Van Allister, of course, advertised for an assistant, and I answered. He remembered me from the college days, and I managed to convince him I knew enough about chemistry to warrant a trial. He had a young lady doing his secretarial work, a Miss Marjorie Purdy. She was one of these strict attention to business types, and as good looking as she was efficient. Miss Purdy. She had been helping Van Allister a bit in his laboratory, and I soon discovered He took a genuine interest in puttering around, making experiments of her own. Indeed, she spent nearly all of her spare time with us in the laboratory. It was only natural that such companionship would result in a close friendship, and it wasn't long before I began to depend on her to help me in difficult experiments when the professor was busy. I never could seem to stump her. That girl took chemistry as a duck takes the water. About 2 months ago, give or take. It seemed like the professor, Van Allister, had the laboratory partitioned off and made a separate workroom for himself. He told us that he was about to enter upon a series of experiments which, if successful, would bring him everlasting fame. He flatly refused to make us his confidants in any way, shape, or manner. From that time on, Miss Purdy and I were left alone more and more. For days at a time, the professor would retire to the seclusion of his new workshop, sometimes not even appearing for his meals. That meant, too, that we had more spare time on our hands. Our friendship ripened. Indeed it did. I felt a growing admiration for the trim young woman who seemed perfectly content to fuss around smelly bottles and sticky messes. Gowned in white from head to foot, even the rubber gloves she wore. Day before yesterday, Van Allister invited us to his workshop. At last, I have achieved success, he announced, holding up for our inspection a small bottle containing a colorless liquid. I have here what will rank as the greatest chemical discovery ever known. I'm going to prove its efficiency right before your very eyes. Bruce, will you do me a favor? Bring me one of the rabbits, please. I went back into the other room and brought him one of the rabbits we kept together with guinea pigs for experimental purposes. He put the little animal into a small glass box, just large enough to hold it, and closed the cover. Then he set a glass funnel in a hole in the top of the box, and we drew nearer to watch the experiment. He uncorked the bottle and poised it above the rabbit's prison. Now, to prove whether my weeks of effort have resulted in success or failure. Slowly, methodically, he emptied the contents of the bottle into the funnel. We watched it trickle into the compartment with a frightened animal. Miss Purdy uttered a suppressed cry, and I rubbed my eyes to make sure that they had not deceived me. For, in the case of what but a moment before there had been a live, terrified rabbit, there was nothing but a pile of soft, white ash. Professor Van Allister turned to us with the air of supreme satisfaction, his face radiant and ghoulish glee, and his eyes were alight with a weird, insane gleam. When he spoke, his voice took a tone of mastery. Bruce. And you too, Miss Purdy. It has been your privilege to witness the first successful trial of a preparation that will revolutionize the world. It will instantaneously reduce to a fine ash anything which it comes into contact except glass. Just think what that means. An army equipped with glass bombs filled with my component could annihilate the world. Wood, metal, stone, brick, everything swept away before them, leaving no more trace than that rabbit I had just experimented upon, just a pile of soft white ash. I glanced at Miss Purdy. Her face had gone as wet as the apron she wore. We watched Van Allister as he transferred all that was left of that poor little bunny to a small bottle and neatly labeled it. I'll admit, I was suffering a mental chill myself. By the time he dismissed me and we left him alone behind the tightly closed doors of his workshop, once safely outside, Miss Purdy's nerves gave way completely. She reeled and would have fallen if I had not caught her in my big, strong arms. The feel of her soft, yielding body held close to my own was the last straw. I cast prudence to the wind and crushed her tightly to my breast, kiss after kiss. I pressed upon her full red lips until her eyes opened. I saw the love light reflected in them. After a delicious eternity, we came back to Earth again, long enough to realize that the laboratory was no place for such ardent demonstrations. At any moment, Ben Alistair might come out of his retreat, and if he should discover our lovemaking in his present state of mind, we dared not think of what might happen. For the rest of the day, I was like a man in a dream. It's a wonder to me that if I succeeded in accomplishing anything at all, my body was merely an automaton, a well-trained machine going about its appointed tasks while my mind soared in the faraway realms of delight and daydreaming. Marjorie kept busy with her secretarial work for the rest of the day, and not once did I lay eyes upon her until my tasks in the laboratory were completed. That night, after we gave over to the joys of our newfound happiness, Craig, I shall remember that night as long as I live, the happiest moment that I have ever known. Oh, when Marjorie Purdy promised to become my wife, yesterday was another day of unalloyed bliss. All day long, my sweetheart and I worked side by side. Then followed another night of lovemaking. If you've never been in love with the only girl in the world, Craig, you can't understand the delirious joy that comes from the very thought of her. And Marjorie returned my devotion 100-fold. She gave herself unreservedly into my keeping. Along about noontime today, I needed something to complete an experiment. After I stepped over to the drugstore for it, well, when I returned, I missed Marjorie. I looked for her hat and coat, and they were gone. The professor had not shown himself since the experiment upon the rabbit, and was locked in his workshop. I asked the servants, but none of them had seen her leave the house, nor had she left any message for me. As the afternoon wore on, I grew frantic. Evening came, and still no sign of my dear little girl. All thought of work was forgotten. I paced the floor of my room like a caged lion, every jangle of the phone or ringing of the door bolstered up by flattering hopes of some word from her. But each time I was doomed to disappointment. Each minute seemed an hour, each hour an eternity. Good God, Craig, you can't imagine how I suffered. From the heights of sublime love, I mentally plunged to the darkest depths of despair. I conjured visions of all sort of terrible fates overtaking her. Still, not a word did I hear. It seemed to me almost like a lifetime. But my watch told me it was only 7:30 when the butler told me that Ben Alistair wanted me in the laboratory. I was in no mood for experiments, but while I was under his roof, he was my master, and it was for me to obey. The professor was in his workshop, the door slightly ajar. He called me to close the door of the laboratory and join him in his little room. In my present state of mind, my brain photographed every minute detail of the scene which met my eyes. In the center of the room, on a marble-top table, was a glass case about the shape and size of a coffin. It was filled almost to the brim with that same colorless liquid which the small bottle had contained 2 days before. At the left, on a glass tablery, was a newly labeled glass jar. I could not repress an involuntary shudder as I realized that it was filled with soft, white ashes. Then I saw something that almost made my heart stop beating. On a chair in a far corner of the workshop was the hat and the coat of the girl who had pledged her life to mine, the girl whom I had vowed to cherish and protect while life could last. My senses were numb, my soul surcharged with horror as realization flashed over me. There could be but one explanation. Those ashes in the jar were the ashes of my beloved Margarine Purdy. The world stood still for one long, terrible moment, and I went mad, starkly mad. The next I can remember, the professor and I were locked in a desperate struggle. Old as he was, he still possessed a strength nearly equal to mine, and he had the added advantage of calm self-possession. Closer and closer, he forced me to the glass coffin. A few moments more and my ashes would join those of the girl I had loved. I stumbled against the taboret and my fingers closed over the jar of ashes with one last superhuman effort. I raised it high above my head and brought it down with crushing force upon the skull of my antagonist. His arm relaxed, his limp form dropped in a senseless heap on the floor. Still acting upon impulse, I raised the silent form of the professor and carefully, lest I should spill some of it on the floor, lowered the body into the casket of death. A moment and it was over. Professor and liquid both were gone, and in their place was a little pile of soft white ash. As I gazed at my handiwork, the brainstorm passed away, and I came face to face with the cold hard truth. I had killed a fellow being. An unnatural calm possessed me. I knew there was not a single shred of evidence against me, bearing the fact that I was the last one known to be alone with the professor. Nothing remained but ash. I put on my hat and coat, told the butler that the professor had left word he was not to be disturbed, and that I was going out for the evening. Once outside, all my self-possession vanished. My nerves were shot to pieces. I don't know where I went, only that I wandered aimlessly here and there until I found myself outside your apartment just a little while ago. Craig, I felt as if I must talk with someone, that I must unburden my tortured mind. I knew that I could trust you, old pal. So I've told you the whole story. Here I am. Do with me as you will. Life holds nothing more for me now that Margarine is gone. Bruce's voice trembled with emotion and broke as he mentioned the name of the girl he once loved. I leaned across the table and gazed, searching into the eyes of the abject figure that slouched dejectedly in that big old chair. And then I rose, put my hat and coat, crossed to Bruce, who had buried his head in his hands and was shaking with silent sobs. Bruce. Malcolm Bruce raised his eyes. Bruce, listen to me. Are you sure Margarine Purdy is dead? Am I sure that? His eyes widened at the suggestion and he sat erect with a sudden start. Exactly, I went on. Are you positive that the ashes in the jar were the ashes of Margarine Purdy? Why, I see here, Craig. What are you driving at? Then you're not sure. You saw the girl's hat and coat in that chair, and in your state of mind, you jumped to conclusions. The ashes must be those of the missing girl. The professor must have made away with her, and all that. Come now. Did Van Allister tell you anything? I don't know what he said. I'll tell you. I went berserk. I was mad. Then you come along with me. If she's not dead, she must be somewhere in that house, and if she is there, we're gonna find her. On the street, we hailed a taxi. In a few moments, the butler admitted us that Van Allister's home. Bruce led us into the laboratory with the key. The door of the workshop was still ajar. I closed the door. I strode across the room, tried the knob, but it refused to yield. Where does that lead? Just an afternoon where the professor keeps his apparatuses. All the same, the door is coming open. I returned grimly, stepping back a pace or two. I planted a well-directed kick upon the door. Another and still another, and the framework around the lock gave way. Bruce, with an inarticulate cry, sped across the room to a huge mahogany chest. He selected one of the keys on his ring, inserted it in the lock, and flung back the cover with trembling hands. Here she is, pray, quick, get her out while there's air. Together, we bore the limp figure of a girl into the laboratory. Bruce hastily mixed a concoction, which he forced between her lips. A second dose and her eyes slowly opened. Her bewildered glance traveled around the room, at last rested on Bruce, and her eyes lighted with sudden, happy recognition. Later, the first few moments of reunion, the girl told us her story. After Malcolm went out this afternoon, the professor sent word to me to come into his workshop, as he often summoned me to do an errand or another. I thought nothing of it, and to save time, took my hat and coat along. He closed the door of the little room, and without warning, attacked me from behind. He overpowered me, tied me hand and foot. It was needless to gag me. As you know, the laboratory is absolutely soundproof. Then he produced a huge Newfoundland dog he had secured from somewhere or another, reduced it to ashes before my very eyes, and put the ashes in a glass jar that was a taboret in the workshop. He went into the engine room from the chest where you found me, took out the glass casket at least. It seemed to be a casket to my terror-stricken eyes. He mixed enough of his horrible liquid to fill it almost to the brim. Then he told me that but one thing remained. That was to perform his experiment upon a human being. He shuddered at the recollection. He dilated at length upon what a privilege it would be for anyone to sacrifice his life or a manner for such a cause. Then he calmly informed me that he had selected you as the subject of his experiment and that I was to play a role of witness. I fainted. The professor must have feared for some sort of intuition. The next I remember is waking inside the chest where you discovered me. And well, every breath I took came harder and harder. I thought of you, Malcolm, thought of the wonderful happy hours we'd spent together the last few days. I wondered what I would do when you were gone. I even prayed that he would kill me too. My throat grew parched and dry. Everything went black before my very eyes. Next, I opened to find myself here with you, Malcolm. Her voice sank to a hoarse, nervous whisper. Here, where is the professor? Bruce silently led her to the workshop. She shriveled as a coffin of glass came with her range of vision. Still silently, he crossed directly to the casket, and taking a handful of soft, white ashes, let them sift slowly through his fingers. Such concludes the story of Ashes by two very talented authors. I can definitely see H P Lovecraft's influence, though I haven't read many works, but maybe a poem from the other author. They definitely complemented each other well, as Lovecraft doesn't typically write romance. And this one was heated romance. The most that Lovecraft wrote about romance is very vague. Many say that he wasn't very sociable. So, this story really brought in an aspect of humanity while still having that iconic cosmic horror element that Lovecraft specializes in. Overall, I really enjoyed this read and think that Ashes could be one of the best collaborations I've seen in a while. My favorite part was probably the story about Purdy. It was very interesting to see them fall in love throughout the series. I expected a triangle or a plot twist, and was met with something even more delicious. It seems like the intentions to hire this person without a job that was our protagonist, Bruce, the entire time, was to eventually conduct the experiment on him. However, Purdy being so in love that he fainted at the thought of losing him was very dramatic and added some depth to the story where this could have just been man versus man. There was a lot of elements for like man versus humanity, man versus the environment, and obviously man versus man. I think from what I take away from it, that creation is the key to driving someone mad. That control is really the depth of all humanity's woes. And to give in to one's instincts and to give in to one's thoughts sometimes can be the correct thing to do. As we saw, the professor did indeed die and got turned into his own creation. As he said, it would be anyone's honor to die for science. And well, the honor was all his. But as always, I'd love to hear my lovely Lovecraftians' opinions. So, comment, like, and subscribe, and get a little bit of a cult following going as we continue through all the works of H.P. Lovecraft together. Until next time, bye-bye.